I was raised hearing one story, a story repeated on news screens, whispered in conversations, and printed across headlines. They were the danger, the chaos, the ones to fear. They said Palestinians were the problem. They called them terrorists. But what I saw shattered everything I thought I knew, because when I looked closer, I didn't see hate. I didn't see monsters. I didn't see terror. I saw humanity. I saw children smiling through war-torn streets. I saw mothers who had lost everything and still found the strength to pray. I saw fathers who stood not with weapons, but with dignity and unshakable faith. I saw people living through the unlivable and holding on to peace in their hearts. And for the first time in my life, I started asking questions that shook my soul. Why did they still smile? Why did they still forgive? How could faith still live in people surrounded by so much loss? The more I watched, the more I listened, the more I was humbled, because what I saw in Palestine wasn't what they told me. What I saw was Islam, not the Islam of headlines, but the Islam of the heart. Not the Islam used as a label, but the Islam lived in patience, mercy, and resilience. And it changed me deeply forever. So no, I didn't find Islam through books. I didn't convert after a debate. I found Islam in the tears of the oppressed and the unbreakable light they still carried. And that's why I became Muslim, not out of rebellion, not out of emotion, but because I saw the truth, lived, breathed, and prayed in front of me. These 5 points are not just chapter titles. They are windows into a transformation, milestones in a journey from blind belief to awakened truth. Each point peels back a layer of the false narratives I was raised on, revealing the depth, humanity, and unshakable faith of the people I was once taught to fear. From the lies I grew up believing to the moment I saw their faith outshine my doubts, each phase became a turning point that shattered the propaganda and led me closer to the truth. This isn't just a story about religion. It's about what happens when your heart breaks and opens, when you can no longer ignore what you see, hear, and feel. These 5 parts together form the emotional core of a journey that ultimately led me not only to question what I knew, but to embrace what I had been running from. Islam. 1. The lies I grew up believing. I grew up in a place where the truth was carefully edited. From as early as I can remember, the word Palestinian was always paired with terrorist. The two were inseparable in our media, our classrooms, and even the casual conversations at the dinner table. We were told they hated us, that they didn't value life, that they used their children as shields. We were taught to be afraid. But even worse, we were taught to be indifferent. They weren't people. They were a problem. And I believed it. How could I not? Every news story I saw reinforced it. Every movie villain with an accent. Every documentary edited to show anger but not context. Every article that began with Israel retaliates without ever telling us what sparked the retaliation. It wasn't just the stories they told me. It was the stories they never told that kept me in the dark. Are they prettier? They never told me about the Nakba, the catastrophic expulsion of over 700,000 Palestinians from their homes in 1948. They never told me about the decades of military occupation, checkpoints, home demolitions, and mass incarcerations without trial. They never told me about the children growing up without clean water, or the olive trees bulldozed before harvest, or the mothers who carried their babies across rubble because ambulances were blocked at checkpoints. Instead, I was fed a lie wrapped in patriotism and freedom. But here's what I learned as I got older. Lies don't just distort the world, they deform your soul. They train you to dehumanize, to dismiss suffering, to look at injustice and call it defense. And then something happened. I saw an unedited video. It wasn't flashy or political. It was raw footage from Gaza during an airstrike. The camera wasn't focused on the explosions. It lingered on a father pulling his daughter from rubble, whispering Allah, 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 there is no God but Allah, over her lifeless body. His voice cracked, but his words didn't. He wasn't crying out in hate. He was crying out to God. That moment broke something in me. It was the first time I questioned everything. Why had I never seen this side before? Why was I never taught to mourn with them? Why was I only allowed to see one side of the pain? What followed was a long, painful process of unlearning. I read books by Edward said Elon Pape and Norman Finkelstein. I listened to Palestinian voices, not filtered but full. I started to understand terms like settler colonialism, apartheid, ethnic cleansing, words that sounded radical once but now simply described reality. I had been lied to, not just by the media, but by an entire system that profits off the silence and the smearing of the Palestinian people. And the worst part? The lie wasn't just about them. It was about me. It had trained me to think I was on the side of justice when I was cheering for oppression. It convinced me I was morally superior when I was complicit in ignoring human suffering. And here's the truth I can't unsee. Backhand index pointing right the people I was taught to fear were the ones showing me what real courage, patience, and humanity looked like. Backhand index pointing right the religion I was taught to see as violent was producing some of the most peaceful, spiritually resilient individuals I had ever witnessed. This wasn't just a political awakening. It was a spiritual earthquake. Because to see the lie and to keep living it is to deny your own heart. I couldn't do that anymore. I had to follow the truth, and it was leading me straight into the fire I had been warned to avoid, straight to Islam, straight to Palestine. 2. Seeing the people, not the propaganda I used to think I knew what the truth looked like. I thought it came neatly packaged in press conferences, social media sound bites, and high-definition drone footage with military logos stamped in the corner. I thought the world could be sorted into good and evil, and that I was lucky to be born on the good side. But then, I saw them. I don't mean on the news. I mean really saw them. It started with a single photo. A young Palestinian girl, maybe 7 years old, sitting in the ruins of what used to be her school. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her eyes weren't crying, but they weren't dry either. They held something else, something ancient. Not defeat, not innocence, but grief wrapped in wisdom, a kind of knowing no child should carry. That picture changed me. It pierced through every headline I had ever read about a terrorist cells and a military target. It told a truth no media outlet had dared to show me. The truth of a stolen childhood, of dreams bombed before they could become memories, of futures erased not by fate, but policy. From that point on, I stopped looking at Palestine through statistics. I started looking at it through stories. I watched a video of a young man in Hebron handing out water during Ramadan to Israeli soldiers who had just cursed at him. I listened to a mother from Nablus who had lost 3 sons to sniper bullets, still saying a may Allah soften their hearts. I followed a Palestinian doctor in Gaza who stayed in the hospital for 72 hours straight after an airstrike. Not because he had to, but because he couldn't bear to leave his patients. And that's when it hit me. I had never been shown the people, only the propaganda. I had been trained to reduce their pain to politics, their faces to flashpoints, their stories to strategy. I had learned to ask whether their resistance was justified, but never whether their oppression was. I had been taught to both sides, a conflict where only one side controlled the land, the airspace, the water, the borders, the weapons, and the narrative. But seeing the people changed everything. One day, I saw fathers who walked their children to school under the threat of snipers, still holding their daughter's hand with gentleness. I saw teenagers beaten at checkpoints, still whispering Astaghfirullah, God forgive them. I saw women cooking for entire neighborhoods during Eid while their own kitchens had no running water. How do you not fall in love with a people like that? There's a quiet power in seeing, truly seeing. When you look into the eyes of a mother mourning her child, and she still prays for the world to have peace. When you watch a man bury his wife and still thank Allah for every breath he gave us. When you hear a child say, we are not afraid. We have God, and mean it. You begin to wonder who really needs saving, because for all the material things I had, safety, security, education, comfort, I realized they had something far greater. Backhand index pointing right, they had hearts that refused to be corrupted. Backhand index pointing right, they had dignity that refused to bow. Backhand index pointing right, they had Islam. That's when I understood something that would haunt me in the best possible way. Propaganda can demonize a people, but it cannot erase their humanity. And once you see that humanity, no amount of lies can make you unsee it. They called them terrorists. But what I saw, what I felt in the core of my soul, was a people holding on to faith when the world had let go. And for the first time in my life, I didn't just see Muslims. I saw what made me want to become one. 3, their faith was stronger than my doubts. I used to think faith was weakness. I used to believe that in the face of war, oppression, and poverty, people clung to God only because they had nothing else left. It was a coping mechanism, I thought. A kind of spiritual anesthesia, something to dull the pain of reality. I didn't say this out loud, of course, but it lived in me, hidden behind my sarcasm, my pride, my illogic. But then I watched Gaza during Ramadan. Airstrikes had lit up the sky the night before. Buildings had collapsed. Families had been erased. Yet the next evening, the adhan, the call to prayer, echoed through the streets. Men lined up on flattened concrete. Women wrapped their children in scarves and carried food to the neighbors who had less. Children recited Quran from memory, their voices rising over the sound of drones. They didn't just hold on to faith, they lived it. They breathed it. They embodied it. They embodied it. And I had to ask myself, how? How does a people who have seen so much loss still say, Alhamdulillah, all praise is due to God? How do children who grow up under siege still wake up before dawn to pray Fajr, not out of fear, but out of love? How do mothers who bury their sons still believe in Jannah? As not just an escape, but a promise. My doubt was shaking. Their faith was firm. There was a video I watched once. A Palestinian father holding his dead son in his arms whispered, "We return to Allah. He was never ours. He was always his." And then he kissed the child's forehead and looked to the sky. There was no rage, only surrender. That shook me to my knees because I realized I had built my identity on questioning everything, on distrusting religion, on mocking belief systems. But here was a man who had every reason to scream at the sky, and instead he submitted to it. Not because he was brainwashed, but because he knew something I didn't. He had yaqeen, certainty. He had tawakkul, reliance on God. He had sabor, patience rooted in purpose, and I had nothing. All my life I had leaned on science, on news, on intellectual debates. But none of those things could hold me the way his faith held him. None of them gave me peace. They gave me control, or the illusion of it, but not peace, not comfort in chaos, not light in darkness, but Islam did. I started reading the Quran, not as an academic text, but as a desperate soul searching for air. And what I found wasn't fear, was truth. Unapologetic, uncompromising, sacred truth. Do not think Allah is unaware of what the wrongdoers do. He only delays them until a day when eyes will stare in horror. Surah Ibrahim 14:42. Verily, with hardship comes ease. Surah Al-Inshura 94:6. And when my servants ask you concerning me, indeed I am near. Surah Al-Baqarah 2:186. I realized then the people I had once pitied had something I desperately lacked. They weren't just fighting a war. They were walking through fire and holding on to God with both hands. And I was sitting in comfort, but drowning in confusion. Their faith didn't make them weak. It made them unbreakable. Their belief wasn't a crutch. It was a weapon of the soul. And in their sajda, their prostration, I saw more strength than I had ever seen in any protest or politician. That's when I knew my doubts couldn't stand in front of their faith. They had already won, and I didn't want to fight anymore. I wanted to fall, just like them, to my knees. Not in defeat, but in submission. Because their faith was stronger than my doubts, and now it's becoming my faith too. For the day my heart broke, an open theme. A shattering that healed, pain becoming a portal, humanity awakening to divine truth. I remember the exact moment it happened, not just where I was, not just what I saw, but what it did to me. I had seen plenty of horrific images before. I had scrolled past headlines. I had heard about his civilian casualties and collateral damage. I knew the vocabulary. I knew how to stay numb. I had learned how to harden my heart, just like the world had taught me to. But then came that video. A father running through the rubble of Gaza, screaming his child's name. His clothes were torn. Blood was dripping from his forehead. Dust covered his body. He wasn't crying like in movies. It was an ancient aching howl, the kind that doesn't beg for help because it knows help isn't coming. And then he found her, a small girl, maybe 6 years old, lifeless, not screaming, not moving, just still. He dropped to the ground. He held her. He kissed her face again and again and again. And then he whispered, I told you I'd protect you. I told you I would. Ya Allah, forgive me. That was it. That was the moment. My heart broke. And for the first time in my life, it opened. All the walls I had built to protect myself, they fell like those buildings. All the cold intellectual debates I used to hide behind, they shattered. And I just sat there, weeping like a child, saying, how did we let this happen? I wasn't crying because it was sad. I was crying because I finally felt it, because I finally let myself feel them, not as statistics, not as others, but as my people. And somewhere in those tears, something else rose up inside me, something I hadn't expected, not just grief, but guilt. Guilt for all the years I ignored their voices. Guilt for the times I shared memes while their cities burned. Guilt for laughing at Muslim prayers when I didn't understand them. Guilt for believing the lie that one life matters more than another if it wears the wrong skin, the wrong clothes, the wrong religion. That guilt didn't crush me. It freed me because it brought me to the edge of something sacred, responsibility. I could no longer say, that's not my problem. I could no longer say, it's too complicated. I could no longer pretend that neutrality was noble. Not when I saw what I saw. Not when I felt what I felt. That broken heart of mine wasn't a weakness. It was the doorway, the crack that let the light in. The moment God reached in and said, now you're ready to see me. And I did. I saw him in the Father's surrender. I saw him in the little girl's stillness, like an angel finally resting. I saw him in the dust and in the sky and in every whispered Hasbun Allahu wa ni'mal wakila. God is sufficient for us, and he is the best disposer of affairs. I saw that faith is not born in comfort, it's forged in fire. That's when I understood the Quran in a new way, not just as a book, but as a mirror. Perhaps you hate a thing and it is good for you, and perhaps you love a thing and it is bad for you. And Allah knows while you know not. Surah Al-Baqarah 216, my heart broke that day. But it didn't break down, it broke open. And in that open space, God walked in. With his mercy, with his truth, with his invitation. They called them terrorists. But I saw a father burying his child with more love and grace than I've ever seen. And that moment, that pain, did something no speech, no sermon, no book ever could. It brought me to Islam, not through persuasion, but through witness. Because that day, I didn't just become aware of Palestine. I began the journey to becoming a Muslim. 5. Why I couldn't walk away from the truth. There comes a moment when your soul is shown something so real, so raw, so undeniably true that no matter how hard you try, you can never unsee it again. That was Palestine for me. It started as curiosity, then discomfort, then heartbreak, then realization. And by the time it became truth, I knew something for certain. I could never walk away from it. I had spent my whole life believing I was a critical thinker, that I questioned everything, that I was too logical, too scientific, too rational to be religious. But the more I watched, the more I read, the more I listened, especially to the voices no one wanted me to hear. Something became clear. The people I was taught to fear were living with more integrity, strength, and divine clarity than anyone I had ever known. They were being bombed and still standing for justice. They were being starved and still fasting for God. They were being silenced and still reciting Quran loud enough to shake the earth. And the truth I had grown up believing, it cracked, it collapsed. Because how do you call someone a terrorist while their home is being stolen? Family killed, their prayers interrupted by bombs? How do you accuse them of a barbarism when they show more dignity in death than most of us do in life? How do you still believe you're on the right side when the only way to keep believing it is to close your eyes? I couldn't do it. Not anymore. Truth is heavy. It's not comfortable. It's not easy. It's not popular. It doesn't pat your ego. It doesn't entertain your biases. It doesn't care about your reputation, but it saves you from lies, from ignorance, from yourself. And that's what Islam did. It didn't beg me to convert. It didn't need to convince me. It just stood tall, ancient, unshaken, while everything else fell apart. It was like I'd been living in a house with no foundation, comfortable furniture, beautiful walls. But when the storm came, it all collapsed. And when I climbed out of the rubble, I saw a light. I saw Islam. I saw the people of Palestine still standing in prayer while the world turned its back. I saw truth in their eyes and in their prostration, and that truth didn't scream. It whispered, come home. But here's the thing about truth. You don't choose it like a trend. It chooses you like a responsibility. It asks you questions you can't answer with comfort. It demands from your soul a kind of honesty that the world teaches you to avoid. And when you say yes to it, you lose things, but you gain everything. I lost my old worldview, my illusions of superiority, my safe neutrality. But I gained a clarity that was bigger than me. I gained the realization that Allah was never far away. I just hadn't looked in the right direction. I gained the understanding that Islam wasn't foreign. It was fitra, the original design of my soul. I gained a connection to people I'd never met. People whose language I didn't speak. People across oceans and borders, but whose prayers felt like my own. That's why I couldn't walk away. Because once you see the truth, not the propaganda, not the filtered headlines, not the edited news clips, but the real, sacred, painful, powerful truth, it marks you. It moves you. And if you let it, it saves you. They called them terrorists, but I saw faith that made the angels weep. They called them radicals, but I saw hearts more peaceful than all the Western leaders combined. They called them other, but I saw myself, my soul, my future, my God. So no, I couldn't walk away. Because once Allah shows you the path, turning your back isn't just denial, it's betrayal. And I'd done that long enough. I was done being blind, done being silent, done being lost. I didn't walk away. I walked toward him, toward the truth, toward Islam. They told me a story my whole life. They told me who the heroes were. They told me who the villains were. They taught me to fear the names I couldn't pronounce, to hate the faces I'd never met, to see an entire people through the lens of war, not worship. They told me Palestine was a conflict. They told me Muslims were aggressive. They told me Islam was oppressive. They told me lies. And I believed them. For years, I swallowed every word. I repeated it without question. I looked away when the images became too much. I called myself a neutral. But neutrality, I learned, was just privileged silence. And then I saw, not through the news, not through the textbooks, not through the propaganda I had memorized like gospel. I saw it through a child's broken body, a mother's empty eyes, a father's trembling hands holding pieces of his world in his arm. I saw it through rubble that used to be homes, through blood that used to be hope, through prayers whispered between missile strikes. And something inside me cracked. Not just emotionally, not just intellectually, but spiritually. My soul recognized something my brain had long rejected. These are not the terrorists. These are the truth bearers. These are the people who said, La ilaha illallah, while their homes were being blown apart. These are the people who chose prayer over revenge, dignity over despair, Allah over everything. They had nothing, and yet they had everything. They had bombs over their heads and still thanked God for the sky. They had death all around them and still smiled like Jannah was near. That's not delusion. That's belief. That's Islam. And I couldn't turn away anymore. The more I watched, the more I listened, the more I read Quran with the eyes of a seeker, not a skeptic, the more I realized I had been lied to about the world, but worse, I had been lied to about God. I was told Islam was a cage, but I saw Muslims freer than anyone I knew. I was told the hijab was oppression, but I saw women wearing it with more pride and purpose than any influencer on my feed. I was told Muslims were backward, but I saw them walk forward with more grace than I had ever known. Their faith didn't make them weak. It made them unbreakable. And suddenly I wasn't watching anymore. I was witnessing a people I once misunderstood, witnessing a truth I once rejected, witnessing God, not in the places I expected, but in the places the world had tried to bury. So no, I didn't become Muslim because of a lecture. Not because someone debated me, not because someone argued their religion or won. I became Muslim because the people the world taught me to fear, showed me the face of faith, because the victims of bombs taught me what it means to live. Oh, because the people denied a homeland reminded me where home really is. Because I looked into the ashes of Gaza, the pain of Palestine, the dignity of the oppressed, and I saw something I couldn't explain with logic alone. I saw Islam, alive, breathing, unshaken. And I knew deep in my soul that I had to come home, not just to a new religion, but to the truth I was born with and forgot, to the fitra, to the one God, to the final prophet, to the path that leads not just through life, but beyond it. So yes, they called them terrorists, but I saw their prayer mats. I saw their Qurans kissed before battle. I saw their children reciting Surah Al-Fatiha in bunkers. I saw the Shahada whispered with bloodied lips, and I saw a truth I could not unsee. They called them terrorists, but what I saw made me Muslim, because no lie can survive the weight of a lived truth. And no heart, once awakened by Allah, ever stays asleep again.